Hello, and welcome to the Writers and Illustrators of the Future podcast. This is John Goodwin, your host. This podcast is dedicated to the aspiring writer or artist and will provide inspiration and tips from top professionals in the field, along with contest winners and a few surprise guests. Today we're speaking with both a contest winner and a top professional in the field. Scot Noel was a winner back in 1990 in Volume 6. He's always written science fiction and fantasy fiction. From the moment he learned to scribble in cursive, he began to split his time between playing with toys and writing tales of their plastic adventures. In time, he went on to earn a degree in English and to make his living via the keyboard. Scott has had stories published in Pandora, Strategy Plus, and Tomorrow Magazine, and his short story, Riches Like Dust, was selected for the Writers of the Future Anthology, Volume 6 in 1990, becoming the springboard for a career in computer game development as writer, project manager, and voice director for several award-winning games. He is now publisher and editor-in-chief for DreamForge magazine. Welcome, Scott.
Thank you for having me, John. I'm delighted to be here.
Yeah, and I'm very excited, too, because when we first reconnected, it was via social media. I saw the announcement of DreamForge magazine, and I looked at who is this guy, and then I went back because you sounded familiar, and then I looked you up and I found out that you were a winner, like read in the intro there in Volume 6, and I went, wow. And then I looked at your bio, and there you were, talking about your win back then in 1990 and how you've gone on with your career. So how'd you get started with writing, and when did science fiction first enter in?
Well, the bio is pretty accurate in the fact that I've always just told stories to myself, just to put myself to sleep when I was a kid. I just loved to, when I was playing with my toys, I was actually making up adventures for them. And that just evolved as I grew. What really hit me hard was when I was 9 years old. That's when Star Trek premiered. And that's really when science fiction came into it. Pretty much for me, the way Star Wars affected, people a generation or so later. By the time I got into high school, then, the thing that really set it off was that I took a typing class. Not a writing class, but a typing class. And it fascinated me that I could hit keys and actually put words on paper, where before, I was just, trying to write them on paper with a pen. But so I just fell in love with writing through learning how to type, even though I did very poorly in that course. And this was a Catholic school, and the nuns hated me. But I really taught myself writing and typing outside of class, and I really got pretty good at it after a while. But that just led me to really fall in love with writing, and that was the same time I was starting to pick up books. And some of the first books I picked up were science fiction books. The first book I actually bought that wasn't a comic book was Rocket Ship Galileo by Robert Heinlein. So that's when science fiction like that and like Star Trek started to, come into my life. And I went on to college and took a little bit of a literary turn. I graduated with a degree in English literature. So Moby Dick is one of my favorite works. And my annual fall bedtime reading here is Henry Wadsworth Longfellow's Evangeline. So I just go over that whole spectrum. I just love writing and stories, and I still tell myself stories in my head to fall asleep at night.
Wow. When we set up this interview, I said we had a list of questions I wanted to go over, but unless something else came up that was seemed to be way cool. So this whole thing now of you in computer programming and science fiction, how did because when you did your win with your win in Writers of the Future, you then moved on and you said you started getting into computer programming and gaming, or was it gaming?
Yeah, not computer programming as much as computer gaming, and a little different. I'll explain that. But yes, when I had the Writers of the Future win, I could say that's a turning point in my life, because one of the things that happened there was that you guys helped the writers with publicity in their hometowns and that sort of thing. And there was, about that time in 1990, there was a local computer gaming company that was starting up, just within a few miles of me. And they saw that publicity and they needed a writer. So they came calling. I was actually working in public transportation at the time. And they said, we need someone to write. And, well, write what? Because computer games were new to everybody at that point. But they were talking about the dialogue for the characters and the narrative of the story. And at that time, we actually put novellas and that sort of thing in the game with the game, everything to the manual itself on how you install the game. So they said, well, we need a writer. So I left my job and said, this sounds really cool, because I always loved, new technology and computers anyway.
Yeah.
So I went to work for them, and they were called DreamForge Entertainment. So you kind of now get a sense of where the name DreamForge came from for the magazine.
Wow.
But I went to work for DreamForge Entertainment and was there for at least 7 or 8 years. And that's when computer games were first starting up. They were PC games. They weren't console games. And we started, in DOS. And so my job started out being the writing. But one of the things I'd advise anybody who's at that young point in their life where they're looking for a career, if you can find a company that's just starting up, that's really where you get the most opportunity to grow in different directions and take on different challenges. So while I was doing that writing, then it came down to, hey, well, now we're going to have voice actors do these voices that are in the game. You wrote it. You want to go direct those people? And it's like, sure, I'll go do that. And so then I'm directing the people, and then they're saying, "Oh, well, you did a really good job directing those people. What did you have management skills or something?" It's like, yeah, well, that's what I've been doing ever since before you hired me. I was a manager of things. So they said, "Well, great, you're going to be an associate producer. You can help make these games." And it's like, sure, I'll do that. And then did that for like a couple of years. Well, and it's like, well, now how about you be project manager? It's just like, take the project and run with it. It's just like, we'll start at the beginning, you pick your team and just make this project. So that's the kind of growth you can have when you are lucky enough to get in on the ground floor of something.
That's awesome.
It not only was a career thing, but also DreamForge Entertainment is where I met my wife, Jane. And she was working her way up along that line through being a line artist, and then she was an art director, and then she ended up being project manager. And so we met there and fell in love and got married while we were still working there. And we worked together, and our teams, we made like cult classics that you can even find or hear about today, like Anvil of Dawn, and there's one called Sanitarium that was even mentioned in one of Stephen King's books. D&D titles, we did a lot of those, like Menzo Berenzon and Ravenloft, and my wife Jane worked on the first 101 Dalmatians game for Disney. So it was a really adventurous time. We were just, it was when we were creating the industry, not just the games we were working on. And science fiction came back into that as well, because one of the games that my wife and I both got to work on together was Roger Zelazny. He designed a game called Chronomaster. And I know at one time he was one of the judges for Writers of the Future. In fact, he was one of the judges when I submitted my story in 1990. But yeah, it was then a great thrill to get to talk to him and work on the game with him. And at that time, he was with another author, Jane Lindskold. And he, unfortunately, while he was working on our game, was when he passed away. He died of cancer. And Jane had to pick up for him and finish. She had to finish all the dialogue, and she had to finish the novelization of the game. And so that kind of made her close with us, and we've been friends ever since. And she's become our senior advisor on DreamForge magazine. So that's where some of our publishing and writing expertise came from. Making games is really an all-absorbing 16-hour-a-day stress test, and it really doesn't leave any time for anything else really much in terms of writing other things or doing other things in your life. So after about a decade or so, that's when my wife Jane decided to leave first, and I was very supportive. I said, yes, you can go start your own company, just don't lose too much money, dear. And she actually started the current business we have, which is now 21 years old. So I guess she's done a pretty good job. And I joined her about a year later, and we've been doing that ever since. And we moved again, just kind of a lateral step into technology. But believe it or not, there wasn't always the thing as the website, as internet with websites on it. And we managed to move away from games and get into the beginning of making websites for businesses. And that's what our company is. It's called Chroma Studios, and we do websites, digital marketing, and we make business software and stuff like that. And we've been doing that for a long time now. So that's kind of how it went from Writers of the Future into gaming and into us, owning our own business. But definitely, I would say without Writers of the Future, I would never have gotten into computer games and probably would never have met my wife. So it's pretty cool.
That's way cool. All right, so we've already discussed like what happened after you're winning with Writers of the Future. Now, how'd you end up starting DreamForge? Because that's different than creating websites. So how did DreamForge?
Well, there was a time that about in 2017, our business had reached its height, and it looked like Jane and I were going to have a little more time for personal projects, and that was also a time when, for those of you who know the series Black Mirror, there was an episode of Black Mirror called Metalhead, which is a breathtaking accomplishment in showing a robotic apocalypse. There are these little robot dogs that basically are killing the entire human race, and it's a wonderful accomplishment in black and white. It's cinematography is amazing, the story and acting is amazing, and I just was at the end of it loving it for its art and saying, that's not what's going to happen to humanity. it's like I remember when science fiction was fun and engaging adventures, and even if there was an apocalypse, our species come out the other side and life goes on. And so there was just this bit of a reaction in me. It's like, I want to do something that says no, not that. And so DreamForge came out of just the fact that my wife and I like to do projects together. We like to do things and creative things. And she's got the art side of things handled. She does our layout and she knows that whole graphic arts thing of how to make a magazine look nice, and I knew what I wanted it to be and what kind of stories that I wanted. So we just decided to do that as kind of an adventure here at this point in our lives, and we wanted to use the magazine to stress that idea of like the human adventure is just beginning, like that kind of theme, and humans can overcome any obstacle mentality. And obviously we named it DreamForge after the old computer game that we used to work for, but after 20 some years, that company had faded away, and I just found I could use the name, and nobody cared. So that's where that all came from.
That's great. It's interesting you mentioned that concept, which is, I think, somewhat shades of the old Pulp Fiction, because this is when L. Ron Hubbard wrote Battlefield Earth. It's basically dystopian as an opener, because Earth is wiped out from the Voyager being picked up by an alien probe, and then they send drones and they wipe out humanity. So it starts in the year 3000. But he said ultimately it's a story of the human spirit and how no matter how much opposition it has, the human spirit will ultimately survive and overcome whatever obstacle. And when you say talking like that, that's definitely a lot, at least the type of science fiction that Hubbard and Heinlein and that group like to write about. Definitely there was a lot of challenge to the survival of humanity, but ultimately humanity did, in the end, survive.
Yeah, I actually, it's funny you mentioned Battlefield Earth, but that's probably what got me connected with Writers of the Future, because I still have my paperback copy of that, and I remember seeing it on the shelves at a bookstore. It was this huge paperback, and I probably bought it thinking, well, that I'll get my money's worth out of that, and and I don't know if that was the one, but I remember Writers of the Future coming on a card that was inside a book, and it might have been inside Battlefield Earth, where I picked that up and said, well, that looks fun, and I'll see if I can write some things for them, and I know I sent in at least 2, or maybe the third story was the one that won. So that Battlefield Earth is kind of what also set me on this adventure.
Wow. So Battlefield Earth is what introduced you to your wife. Wow.
If you connect the dots, that's
yes,
possible.
And a big eraser in between all of the other. So now one thing that I was interested in talking about, I know that you've got some transition happening in the new year because of what's happened in 2020, which has happened to a lot of things, which is downsizing or restructuring because of just the current scene. But what you're doing with DreamForge is so important that I really want to talk about and let other people know about it. One, as something that they should read and subscribe to as a publication, but two, for aspiring writers, as something that they can then hopefully aspire to possibly getting published in someday. So talk a little bit about, like, what your objective is with DreamForge and how somebody can get connected with it.
Sure. We've had a lovely run in producing these gorgeously illustrated full color issues, but we've been hit with COVID just like everybody else has, in terms of everybody's concerned. Subscriptions are going down this year because of COVID. We've had the challenges at work, our regular day job, that sort of thing. So we look ahead to next year, and we don't want to give up on our dream, but we realize we have to scale back a little bit to be able to make it work. And one of the things that we've loved most about working with DreamForge is actually meeting people that we work with. And, even if we haven't met them in person, just being able to work with them and meet them on Skype and that sort of thing, and our writers and our first line readers who read for us, and our illustrators. And one of the things we really loved is working with the writers to try to help them make their stories better. So when we looked ahead and we said, gosh, we're probably not going to be able to afford to do things as lushly as we did, this year, next year, what can we do that still engages us, spiritually and mentally, and keeps DreamForge moving on? So we're going to cut back on the printing, but we're going to push the online stuff a little more. So it's where we've been publishing about quarterly. We're going to try to publish some stories like more monthly on DreamForge online next year. And what we're going to do is we're going to be working with the writers. So I'm actually going to buy stories from people and work with them to kind of polish and improve them, and then basically show how that process that we've gone through in working with the writers. We have a couple that we're testing this all out, so we have a couple that we're working with now. One of whom actually, Anna Madden, has published her first story with us in DreamForge, and she's published since then. And the story that we're working on with her was actually a silver honorable mention for Writers of the Future. And we're looking at it and saying, okay, well, what are the issues here? Where does this lose attention? How can we engage the reader more? How can we intensify the relationships between these wonderful characters? And how can we make this character mean more? And what I want to do with DreamForge, which we're going to call it DreamForge Anvil, actually, is I want to let writers come in and see that process and basically say, well, here's the original story. Here's kind of what the editor was seeing in terms of some of the problems. Here's what the author came up with. And also let them engage in telling us whether or not we got it right. Because I think sometimes writers get that feeling that, the editor's sitting on the top of the hill and he's on the throne kind of thing. He's just making this decision. This one is a perfect story. And it's really not like that. It's much more of a conversation, back and forth. Even when we're reviewing stories with our first line readers, we don't always agree what the best story is. And we'll have arguments about that. So stories are alive. They're a living thing, and people have different opinions on them, and the editor just does the best job he can finally to select the things that he thinks will work. And I just want to get some of that kind of process and stuff across to people who are still who are trying to get published and want to read how all that works.
Okay, that makes sense. So now with someone trying to, first of all, subscribe, which is what the first thing I recommend anybody do, is to subscribe to read it, because it is a beautiful magazine that you've put together. I mean, I've been subscribing since the beginning. But how does somebody go about subscribing either to the print and or the online?
Well, just go to DreamForgeMagazine.com, and we'll keep everybody informed as to exactly what's available and exactly how to go about it. But we'll always have a subscription button on the homepage of the website at DreamForgeMagazine.com, and we'll have pages. Like this new concept that I'm talking about, we'll have a page that walks you through it and explains how it works and how to subscribe to it.
Right. So now with someone who wants to submit, how do they go about submitting? What's your submission process for stories?
Sure. Same idea. We'll have that all noted on the website. We actually have a page for submissions and that sort of thing. But our submission process is an electronic one. So it's taking your manuscript and it's uploading it into our system. And what happens then is we've recruited first-line readers from around the world that basically help me review the stories, and they provide comments. And then we discuss things and we decide, which ones are going to be good for the next issue, that sort of thing. So that's basically all you do is go to the website and look for that. Now, we don't have we basically have open periods. We're not always open for submissions.
Yeah.
So one of the things you're going to do when you go to the website is look and see if we're open at that particular time.
I'm tracking. So now you made a comment about the types of stories that you like. So let's talk about that a bit, because I'm in total agreement with you on that. With the writers of the future, our stories we go for that they're appropriate for middle school and up. So it's automatically, there's not a whole lot of slash and gash, just the gore, and profanity is kept to a high filter, and we try to make it. It doesn't always. I mean, it's not less a prerequisite, but they tend to go in the direction of, where it has some type of a good ending, or some type of a moral, or some type of the guy that learns better. There's something that comes out of it. It just doesn't end like all of a sudden, what happened? Where it's not horror, where the ending is by very nature bad.
Yes, that's a pretty good description of the kind of things that we're looking for. Our reading level is like young adult and above. We want it to be accessible, on that YA level, and then we, if there's more thought behind it and different levels to it, that's great as well. But we are looking for that idea of how humans are going to be, not just survive in the future, like, oh, tomorrow's the apocalypse and we'll manage to have 3 people survive, but basically how people look at problems and overcome those problems for a better tomorrow. So we have a range of stories that will give some idea of how that kind of thing goes. Like, a couple I can remember offhand, but we have one that is called Wrath of a Lightweight by Emily Ma, that is about teenagers on Mars. And the idea is that the first settlement on Mars, the doctors have basically decided that, the kids are being adversely affected by the low gravity and all that. And then edict comes down that the teenagers, they all have to come home. They have to be sent back to Earth. But they don't want to. They've basically adopted Mars as essentially their home. That's where their families are. That's where their futures are. So it's about the kids taking charge of their lives and finding ways to communicate to the adults that, this is our future and you're wrong about what you're trying to do. And the fact that the kids go together as a group, as a community, and try to solve their own problem, that's the kind of thing that makes it a DreamForge story. We've had a story about place and time in the future where the main character is just trying to find their profession. Like, what is it that they want to do? And, they end up essentially becoming a mathematician. There's that story about just, the future is going to be fine, but people are still going to have trouble finding their own vocations. And those kinds of things are DreamForge stories. We do occasionally start with an apocalypse or a very dire situation, but we always want our characters to see the light at the end of the tunnel, or find a way, working either as a community or together to get past that.
Yeah, even if they have to go through 15 try-fails, the final one's going to make it.
Absolutely, because that's really how we are.
Yeah. Never say never. So, in terms of the future of Scot Noel on your writings, what do we have to look forward to? What's in your short, medium, and long range future?
Well, I'm one of those people who always has enough to keep me busy. If you look at my schedule for the day, and I look at my schedule and I fantasize that I might actually get it done, but it usually turns out to be several 12-hour days worth of activity. So right now we have our web business, our day-to-day job to still navigate through this COVID downturn, and DreamForge to do the same. But I always want to be an evangelist for the idea that the human adventure is just beginning. I can see, having a couple novels possibly in me here to get out, and I'm working on one that we're actually going to publish in DreamForge next year that is called Sovereign Ice, and it's a big epic. It's about basically rebuilding the world after a future ice age. And so it starts with a little bit of apocalypse, like Ed said, and it works its way into how this new world is going to unfold. But for me, it's all about fun. It's not about necessarily having a book on the shelf or getting any fame out of it. It's just basically writing is one of the most hopeful things you can do, because if you're telling stories, you're basically thinking of telling them to somebody. Even if your writing audience is 3 people or your best friend or your wife or whatever, I still think that it's worthwhile because it's a hopeful endeavor. It's building and creating something.
Okay, well that's nice. That's good. I can understand about the 12-hour days, and doesn't leave a whole lot of room for writing that next epic novel. But what do you see as the
12-hour days is a vacation, man.
Yeah, that's in my schedule for a while. I just, the standard publishing joke. Yeah, I only work half days.
Right.
Yeah.
You can pick any 12 hours you want, any half day you want.
Exactly.
Yep.
So, on this subject of publishing in general, what do you see as the future? Do you have any predict for like print versus online versus the short fiction, long fiction? Any particular thing that you see based upon the trend you've experienced or coming out with DreamForge, because you publish short fiction? Was it up to novella length or novelette length or?
Well, I think that what I see, just as having gotten into the industry a bit, is it used to be said in the old days that if you were going to be a writer, you wanted to write for the magazines first, right? And then that's how you learned your craft, and then you would try to sell to publishers. And kind of the way the world is now, I tend to see people writing novellas and building their own audience. So it's basically having your website, having your blog, however you're going to get out there, just to your first audience, and start writing those adventures and building your audience. And I think these days the traditional publishers get more interested in you when you are able to actually show, look, I've done this work and I've actually built an audience, and if you take me on, I'm going to bring my audience with me. So I think that's one way that things are going to go. Also, if possible, I forgot of a major thing we should mention for next year.
What's that?
Well, next year we're going to be cooperating with Uproar Books. They're a publisher in Tennessee, I believe, and they're going to be publishing an anthology of science fiction and fantasy stories by both DreamForge and Space and Time magazine, which is another small press magazine that we've been cooperating with. And so there's going to be an anthology called Worlds of Light and Darkness that's going to come out next spring from Uproar Books, and it's going to include some of the best stories from these 2 magazines.
Wow, that's very exciting.
Yes, we've been having fun doing it, and the publisher has been so impressed by the progress so far that they ask us on the cover page to append, say it's volume 1. So I think they're thinking, wow, this might really work, and hopefully we'll have more volumes to come.
Oh, wow, that'd be great. That gives you hours 13 and 14 of the day. Okay, good.
That's right. Yeah. And just to put in a plug for Space and Time magazine, that's published by Angela Yuriko Smith. And Space and Time has been a semi-pro magazine. I think it's the longest continuously published semi-pro magazine there is since 1966. And she hasn't always been the publisher of it. She took over at about the same time that we were publishing DreamForge, which is kind of, these 2 publications that were just finding their footing when you think of it, and a little bit lost. So we kind of hit it off, and we were supportive of one another. And we've come up with deals to make subscriptions to both magazines a little more intriguing to people by basically saying, hey, if you subscribe to DreamForge, you can get a digital subscription to Space and Time for free. And if you subscribe to Space and Time, you can get a digital subscription to DreamForge for free. So, we've been working on things like that, and then along comes Upper Books, and you have 3 small, publishers trying to cooperate to do some cool things.
Well, that's very nice. And I think that's smart, where there's a lot of talent out there, and there's a lot of people that need to have the ability to get their voice heard, and with what you're doing there makes that possible for the aspiring artist to rise to the top and be noticed. So that's really important, I think.
Yep, and I think Writers of the Future really does that possibly better than anyone, in that you're really looking for the quality stuff. You like, one of the differences I think between what we do and what you do is I'm kind of putting together an issue that has a theme, and I'm trying to put a certain, here's the long story, here's the short story. I'm kind of putting a puzzle together. And so a lot of good stories come past me that I can't necessarily take on, because I'm going to say, oh, but that one's a little too long. I already got my long story, or I don't want to have 2 stories that both involve brothers or whatever. But I'm kind of putting a puzzle piece together, so I don't always get to just pick the best ones. But I think you guys really have the ability to just find the best talent and bring it forth, because you're not quite as constrained as like magazines are.
That's a good point, and you actually bring up 2 points there. One is, yes, with Writers of the Future, when L. Ron Hubbard created it, it was supposed to be that ability to provide a means for the aspiring writer, and then 5 years later, aspiring artist, for the creative efforts to be seen and acknowledged. And it didn't really have a theme other than that forum for the best to rise to the top. And when Scott Card came out and had his magazine, which he stopped publishing last year, he made this interesting comment that, in actual fact, Writers of the Future gets all the best, and we got what Writers of the Future didn't take. So, which is hilarious. I mean, obviously he's a judge, and he's very, very supportive of the program because of that just amazing products that it's found and established.
Well, we've seen in selecting stories for DreamForge that we get many submissions from Writers of the Future, either people we've published or who have gotten honorable mention, that sort of thing. And we've at this point published like 13 people who've been associated with Writers of the Future, either winners or some level of honorable mention to that. And here, as we look forward to the new year with what I want to do in terms of working with writers, I find myself working with a Writers of the Future submitter. So you guys are a force in the field. Yeah,
and we're up to a couple thousand entries a quarter now between both contests, and it's grown so much from when we first started back in the early 80s. And with entries now from over 175 countries, it's really become quite the global communication of the future of science fiction and fantasy. And the art, I've been very excited about the art, because this last year, maybe you noticed in the book, we had an illustrator winner from Vietnam, and his art was totally different than the illustrator winner from Turkey, which is totally different than the illustrator winner from Iran. And then you have the stuff which people in America are more used to, but now it very much has this universal flavor. And we also, this last year, started publishing. If a story was a winner from England, then we used UK English, which is a bit different than Australian English, where we had 2 winners there, and definitely different than American English. So each story has the English against that country where it came from. So we didn't edit it to make it all American English. It was kept in the countries that it is. So it's become even more and more international in its scope, which is I think is important too.
Yes, I agree.
Now, you made a comment about how you run into a great story, but you've already got your long story, or you've already got something in a certain theme, and this doesn't fit that theme. So even though it's really awesome, you can't take it. I think it's important for aspiring writers to really understand that, because it's not because you have a bad story that it didn't sell. It really wasn't appropriate for the next issue, or you just had a story like that. Can you explain that a bit more? Because it comes up routinely that someone automatically takes a reject, meaning they're not good, when that's not what it is at all.
Yeah, we actually even try to avoid using the term reject. We tell people we've returned their story, And when we can, we ask them, would you like some comments on this? Because one of the things we found is not everybody wants comments. Not everyone takes any comment well.
Yeah.
But so we've started getting into the mode of saying, would you like comments? And we can't necessarily give them to you right now as we're returning your story, but once we get everything under control, we'll get back to you. But yes, people have to realize that when they submit stories, execution might be very unique, but ideas aren't necessarily always unique. And we could get, in any one submission period, we might get 3 time travel stories that are all very similar in terms of kind of what they're talking about, or 2 stories that involve brothers who are doing something against all odds, or there are just similarities between the stories that it's like I can't take both of these, because even if I space them out in issues, somebody 2 issues down the road is going to say, but you just published one like this, like didn't we see 2 brothers doing something last issue?
Yeah.
So and as you're going through the stories, then you just try to figure out which one you're going to select. And I remember we had, and I think it was in our first round of submissions, I got 2 stories that were essentially about women warriors who were like sisters in battle, saving a fantasy kind of environment. And one was written in a very Tolkien-esque universe, and one was written in a universe that the author came right out of their imagination. It was their thing. And we made the decision that even though the one that felt a lot like standard Tolkien fantasy, it was actually a tad better written, but the other one basically we appreciated the imagination of the author and coming up with a world wholesale, out of their own head. And that's the one that we went with. So there are decisions like that we're making. And as I said, when I work with my team and we have people from around the world, from Australia, New Zealand, and Germany, and India, looking at these stories, so we get a good mix of reviews and comments. We don't always agree on what the best story is. And in this last round, one of my lead first line readers telling me, I really love this story, you need to buy this story. And I'm looking at it and it's like, and it's a wonderful story, but it's a Greek mythology story about Icarus and Daedalus, and that has no place in this issue.
Yeah.
It's like, there's nothing I can do with this. And he's getting back and saying, can I at least write the author and tell them what a wonderful job they did? And it's like, I'll write them too and tell them they did a wonderful job. I just can't buy this, right now. So those are the kinds of things. Having a story returned, one, is not a sign that you didn't necessarily do a good job or reach a certain level. There are a whole bunch of things that are going on there in the process. And editors, if you submit a dozen stories to us, that people might think sometimes they're bothering the editor. They're submitting all these works, and it's like, I keep getting rejected time and time again. What they don't see is the editor and the team on the other side basically, lots of times saying, this one's better. We need to keep an eye on this person. And look, they improved this. That kind of thing goes on. And, people should never self-reject. They shouldn't say, well, this isn't good enough. It's like, we'll look at it. We don't form bad feelings about people just because you keep submitting stories and we keep sending them back. It's like, oftentimes we're rooting for you and hoping that you learn something, and if that story doesn't sell with us, that you find the right home for it.
That's interesting you said that. One of our most popular podcast interviews is called The Topanga Canyon Story with Dean Wesley Smith, who tells a story in his creative writing class, talks about this author they just call him Topanga Canyon. And he had been submitting and he had been talking with other editors saying, okay, this guy here, he's coming along. And Topanga Canyon is a guy named Preston Dennett who won a few years ago. He had entered 47 times, but he'd been entering since the very beginning, even before you. And he quit at one point. He thought, I'll never make it. Nobody's interested. And it got to be a talk about at one of his workshops, Dean Wesley Smith's workshops. Yeah, there was this one guy, just Topanga Canyon. He just all of a sudden he disappeared. And then when Preston was talking with someone, they said, he listened to this one podcast, this one interview, says, yeah, well, at least it's, it's like I always tell the Topanga Canyon story. And he just went, what? And then he wrote to Dean and found out that it was him, and he had just lost all confidence in himself. He self-rejected himself. But these editors were saying, he's getting close. Who's going to be the first one that buys him? And the editors were talking amongst themselves when magazines used to be much more plentiful. And then he disappeared. And then he finally came back, and he ultimately won the contest then, and has done quite well since. But it's interesting. Self-rejection is like the worst thing you can get into as an author, because you can assume it's the quality of writing. It doesn't have to be that at all. It can just be also, it's what's right for that magazine, what's right for that current issue,
And budgets play a role, limited budgets. Things for writers to realize is that lots of times those stories come in and we enjoy reading your story. We just, can't buy it because we only have so much money that we can spend on so many stories for so many issues, and then no matter how good it is, we just can't take it on.
Yeah.
And lots of the stories that they might not hit the level or fit the puzzle piece that we need at the time, but that doesn't mean we didn't enjoy them. Lots of times there are elements and themes and that sort of thing that we really did appreciate, and we think highly of that author for having tried that. Just getting published and isn't necessarily the sign of where you're at in your career, because you just need to keep getting that out to different magazines. Realize that there are a limited number of magazines and a limited number of spaces, and you're in competition with thousands of other people. So you're not always going to hit that mark easily or right off, but always keep trying and realize that people may be enjoying your stories even though they're editors who are sending them back.
Well, good. That's good to know, and I'm sure people listening to this podcast are also going to be able to appreciate that and at least put that in there. So it's one less reason to self-reject, one less reason to say, "Oh, I'm no good. I'm gonna quit," when it has nothing to do with that. It has everything to do with what you've just been saying.
Yep.
So if somebody wants to be able to reach out to you and just further this conversation, or if they have any other questions, how do they reach you?
Well, they can email me directly. I'll give you my direct email. It's Scot, SCOT, just one T. So SCOT and then a dot. Last name's Noel. It's NOEL at DreamForgeMagazine.com. And they can just email me, and when I can, I will be glad to get back to them. That's
great. And it's been great speaking with you, Scot. I'm really glad you gave me the time to be able to talk about this, because I think it's important.
I appreciate the opportunity to be here, and I appreciate the opportunity to talk on these subjects.
Yes. And thank you for listening. Subscribe to the Writers of the Future podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Writers and Illustrators of the Future are contests created by L. Ron Hubbard to provide a means for the aspiring writer and artist to be seen and acknowledged. It is free to enter and open to new and amateur short story writers and artists of science fiction or fantasy. Again, thank you very much, Scot.
You're most welcome. Thank you, John.
Want to welcome to the Essentialist. We have a panel show tonight, and tonight we have Laura Lee.
The UPRN family of shows would like to take a moment to thank our loyal listeners
at DreamForgeMagazine.com. And they can just email me, and when I can, I will be glad to get back to
broadcasting
them.
on multiple platforms like Live 365,
it's been great speaking with you, Scot. I'm really glad you gave me the time to be able to talk about this, because I think it's important.
Highly rated and best
I appreciate the opportunity to be here, and I appreciate the opportunity to talk on these subjects.
Yes. Alternative media.
And thank you for listening. Subscribe to the Writers of the Future podcast wherever you get your podcasts.
Overrun by a
Writers and Illustrators of the Future are contests created by L. Ron Hubbard to provide a means for the aspiring writer and artist to be seen and acknowledged. It is free to enter and open to new and amateur short story writers and artists of science fiction or fantasy. Again, thank you very much, Scot.
You're most welcome. Thank you, John.
This is all made possible because of you, the listener, that tunes in live every night, who can tell the difference that independent thinking makes. The best way to show our appreciation is to thank you and continue to allow our listeners the ability to download the archives of all the shows free of charge on iTunes, Podbean, and SoundCloud. No monthly fees, no cost to download